All right, and we are back to the Zoomvivor Deep Dive, a CNC podcast. Today we'll be talking about season 5, episode 10, Quick on the Draw. And I have as my co-host today, Stan. Stan, how you doing today? What you been up to, buddy?
I'm well, man. Thank you for having me. I've been really looking forward to joining you on Casey Needs a Co-host, and since playing Zoomvivor, I've gone back to my world outside of these games. I've been on the bench on the radio right now because things haven't been well on the financial side of the radio station, so that really sucks. But on the flip side, things have really been on the up and up for me with the voiceover career and with the podcasting career. So I just want to share with you, like, the last week has been one of the highlights of my podcasting career to date. So I started it off with being a guest on the Rob as a Podcast patron feedback show, and I got to meet Rob Sesternino himself on Easter Sunday. Like, that's how my Easter started. We talked about Survivor Fiji for a little over an hour. And I got to meet my favorite ever survivor, my favorite ever podcaster. And dude, there's nothing that really compares to just getting to have that one on one conversation with somebody who really paved the way for you.
That is freaking awesome. Yeah, I was actually curious about that because I did see, obviously you posted, on social media when you were on there, and I was going to ask, how the heck did you even get on that? Like, what was the process?
Yeah, that's the question, right? Right? Like, how does some guy from the Philippines, the other half of the world, find his way on Rob as a podcast? So I'm part of the patron group of Rob as a podcast, and there's a Facebook group where at the start of the year, when Rob decided to rank all the seasons of Survivor with the help of the listeners, he posted this link where you can apply for the patron feedback show. So this is where these guest co-hosts come in and answer questions from the other patrons, and then they and Rob get to hash it out. Well, no, I wouldn't say hash it out, but they and Rob just get to talk shop about Survivor and about that season. So I actually found out about it because of Lauren Pratt from my Zoomvivor season, because she's also one of the patrons. And early on in January, she applied for Panama and Gabon, both of which haven't come up yet on the season rankings. She tells me about this in March, 2 months after the applications had already opened, right? And I was like, you know what? 10 seasons had already been talked about, but let me shoot my shot anyway. So I type in an application for Karong, and I was like, I want to talk about it as a reformed Michelle hater, because I used to dunk on Michelle a lot. I was on Team Aubrey all the way. Now, Winners at War changed that, and I'm no longer a Michelle hater. And then I was like, you know what? I want to enhance my chances of getting onto the patron feedback show. Let me apply for another season. And I applied for Fiji because I'd actually met Earl Cole here in Manila because of
Really?
Rain Loling, the winner of my season, when she organized this meetup between the local community and Earl Cole. So I get to meet Earl, and everybody from the local community meets Earl, and we're all in one room, and they're starstruck as fuck. They can't find the words to talk to him and ask him any questions. And so the host in me just kicked in, and I basically hosted a panel interview with Earl. Like, I was asking him questions for a solid hour, right? So I type in my application, I love Fiji. It doesn't get a lot of love from the fan community, but I love it, and I have a personal connection because I've met Earl Cole, and I got to interview him here in Manila. So I guess that got Rob's attention, and about a couple weeks after I sent in that application, I woke up to an email, and they invited me on.
That's so freaking wild. Which two things about that, because then we're gonna, dive into the episode. Well, one, did Lauren ever get a chance to, I guess, do anything with the patron feedback?
So I'm not sure because, as far as I know, they haven't gone into Fiji and to Gabon and Panama yet. Like, the current week that they're doing is Guatemala, and then they had me on for Fiji the previous week, so that's where we're at. So I'm not sure about Lauren's application yet.
Okay. And then also, why does Rain know Earl?
That's another great question. So I talked to Rain about it because I didn't know up until I had to do my own research heading into the interview with Rob. And apparently, Rain was Facebook friends with Earl even before 2019 when the meetup happened. I guess she's one of those people who just add survivors on Facebook. I'm not one of those people, so I wouldn't know, right? I would never have the cojones to just click add friend. But she had the guts to do it, so she did. And then he posted about having a layover here in Manila for a couple of days in between his trip from Australia. So he was here for a couple of days, and she messaged him and said, "Hey, I am a leader in the community, or I know people. If you want to meet the fans, the fans want to meet you." So she organized it within a couple of days, and then I heard it from somebody, and then I messaged Rain, and then that's how I got myself an invite.
That is so wild. I would have never really thought to just add Survivor people on Facebook. I don't know if I want to do that, but that's still really cool. The fact that he even did that is really, really shows that he's pretty down to earth, because I feel like other people would just ignore it or be like, "No, I'm not going to do that." But
Dude, I thought that Earl was pretty disconnected from Survivor because we never really saw him come back after Fiji, right? But it turns out if you go to his Instagram, he's pretty plugged in. He connects with a lot of the alumni, a lot of people from the Survivor community, and if you go through his Instagram, people like Rain and myself were actually on his Instagram because he posted a group photo from that very meetup. So, getting to talk about that experience with Rob and how much I love Survivor Fiji, even though it's so underrated, that was a highlight for me. And then just a few days after that, I also celebrated 7 years of podcasting because my own podcast, the Wrestling Podcast, we celebrated 400 episodes. So,
oh my
all these
gosh.
milestones within the span of a week, fucking insane, brother.
Yeah, dude, that's absolutely amazing. Well, I guess on that, let's actually jump right into it.
Let's do it.
So we're obviously just going to start right off with the boot. We have the Brian boot. What the hell? What did you make of that?
Yeah, you know what? I was pretty shocked, and I kind of had an idea that it wasn't going to be as straightforward as it was presented. And my quick thoughts on the Brian boot was that I thought he was getting too cute. I thought he was trying to be a little too flashy when clearly the trend in the season was let's take out the biggest threat. And I think it was such a stark contrast to how our season played out towards the end. Because towards the end, it was really a march to the end for our alliance, right? And even though Rain was the biggest threat, she made it virtually impossible for us to take her out. In contrast, Zoomvivor 5 is very hyper aware about who's got the biggest target, and that's why you see people like Bads getting taken out in the final 8. And now Brian, while not necessarily being the biggest threat, really painted a target on himself by, again, I'm going to use that term, trying to be too cute mere minutes right before they went to tribal. And from what I gathered from the edit was he tried to stray from the plan right at the last second so that Bing wouldn't get voted out and Kenita would get the votes on her via plurality, right? Like 3-2-2 or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I actually watched this episode with someone else, and we were talking about the whole editing and the misdirection of, Brian not actually seeming like he was going to be the boot. Because they only ever, if I remember correctly, they only actually ever mention it once. And that is right in the beginning. It's Dakota who mentions, well, it looks like Brian's the biggest target. Like, now we have to get him out. And yeah, I mean, I guess I would agree with that. He definitely his whole trying to save Bing is what ultimately cost him the game. But it's also really funny because he does mention that Bing is a big target. And so it's a shame that he was trying to play a loyal game and it really cost him in the end.
Dude, I wouldn't even say he was playing a loyal game because at some point in the episode he was trying to get Bing out, right? And so just to give context, our listeners and viewers, Bing and I are pretty good friends from real life. So we've known each other for about 5 years at this point. So she's basically the reason why I'm somewhat still invested in this season. Like without her, I probably wouldn't be invested on this level. So I've been paying close attention to Bing's game, and it's pretty interesting how she and Brian have been working in lockstep. at this point, and they got the credit for the bad's blind side, which really painted a picture, painted the target on their back. That's why you could kind of see everybody else look in their collective direction as a duo, right? And at some point when that shit's happening, one of them's really bound to get the bullets. And at first we were led to believe that was gonna be Bing. So when she found the idol, that was good for her. And you could kind of tell that she had an inkling that maybe Brian was already turning on her, but he ultimately didn't.
Yeah, but with that though, I mean, I feel like with Brian's confessional in the beginning, I didn't necessarily see that as he was turning on her. I saw that as Brian was running through in his mind like the possibilities, you know. So, but ultimately, I feel like yeah, he was playing loyal, which at this point in the game, we haven't seen a ton of loyalty from the remaining six, or I guess in that case, the remaining seven. Um,
Right. And that says a lot about how fluid these games are. People have to remember that these are filmed over the course of a weekend, right, with allowance for sleep. And loyalty is such a it's such a fraught concept in the context of a mini like this, because let's face it, guys, we're basically watching a mini play out, right? This happens over 2 days, and when you're playing with people who don't really know shit about themselves, about the people they're playing with, loyalty is such a tough concept to hang over other people's heads. That's why I think the gameplay is way more fluid, and it you can kind of see them alluding to it in the episode itself. Like you have James asking the other asking the castaways, right? Like, what is loyalty for you, or how do you define somebody's gameplay? Like, is this really loyal or whatever? And people are also talking about it in their confessionals, like, is this person going to be loyal to me? And to me, as a player looking from the outside in, it's so laughable. It's really comical that people give us put such a premium on loyalty, given that who the fuck has these tight connections over the course of 2 days, unless you've got some personal connection predating the game. You get what I mean?
Oh, definitely. But you know what? It's funny. Just, you know, not even in a game setting. Look at the way people deal with their relationships or even their love life. I mean, bonds can really happen pretty quickly. Sometimes it's over the most stupid crap. You know, kind of, you know, let's talk about, you know, on that subject, you have Erica and Dakota who at one point lived around the same area in the United States, and that was their initial bond. And look what's happened. Dakota was not originally loyal to Erica, and then when he decides to, you know, be loyal to her or try and help her or save her, he then takes the idol back for himself. And despite those two instances and many other instances that Dakota's fucked over his allies, Erica is still loyal to him, or, you know, still with him. I don't know how you want to exactly determine it, but also in this episode, Erica, which actually I feel like the edit was very good for Erica and Kenneth this episode, although Kenneth did not vote correctly in the end, which is a whole other topic. But anyway, going back to what I was saying though, you know, you have Erica talking about, well, Kenneth wasn't with me, but Kenneth came clean. Well, maybe we can be together, but also ultimately I don't trust him because of all of that. But it's like, but you trust Dakota still after everything? And after he fucking booted off like 3 or 4 of his other allies?
I wouldn't blame Dakota necessarily for booting all of his allies, all right? First and foremost. Second, I think that in an ideal world where Dakota gets easy pickings of all of his allies, I don't think he'd be working with Erica this far into the game. Okay? It's not a knock against Erica. I've never met her. I have never interacted with her online at all, so I'm really just going off of what I see in these episodes. But Erica and Dakota don't seem to be ride or die allies. And I think that the sudden eliminations or the blind sides of Sherry and Costas really played a big factor in Dakota really being stuck with Erica. Plus, I'm sure that at the back of their minds, they're also slightly mindful that, okay, we're the last 2 foreign people left in a game in which the majority are all Filipinos. And James touches on this in Tribal Council. Hell, every episode, he always feels the need to ask, is there a Filipino alliance? And I think at this point, the answer is clearly no. So I just want to say this, as a viewer, I'm kind of tired of this narrative. Like, I'm really tired of them pushing the Filipino versus foreigners alliance, because clearly that turned a lot of people off in our season, and that's why this season the cast, even the crew, have really made a proactive attempt to try to dissuade everybody from forming that meta narrative and manifesting it. But the more that it gets brought up, it just really annoys me, because I hated it in my season. I only stuck to it because I thought it was convenient, and I didn't want to rock the boat, didn't want to be the biggest threat. But watching it play out now from the outside in and hearing this, is there a Filipino alliance? Please stop it with that bullshit. There is no Filipino alliance narrative. We don't need that shit. So let's go back to Dakota and Erica. Let's talk about them, because I think Dakota has found himself in a great spot right now where he is emerging as the biggest threat. And I think out of all these other players, he's one of the two people who's hyper aware enough to know that he may be the biggest threat at this moment.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the thing too. Like, after everything with Bads, then the clear three biggest threats were Brian, Bing, and Dakota. I mean, Dakota's done a really good job, I guess, of managing his threat level this whole game. I mean, I think people still recognize him to a degree, but I think the biggest thing with Bing and Brian was that they popped their head up from undercover, and now everyone saw who took the shot. So that's the only reason why they are really on the forefront of being everyone's target.
Right.
But
It's very interesting that you mentioned that they just popped up right from being undercover. And I guess the question then becomes, was it too early to take a shot at Bads? And that's something I've been grappling with since I watched his boot episode. Like, was it too early? I talked to Bing about it, and I did ask her, and she didn't spoil anything that happened after the episode. But I do remember her saying, like, she really felt like he was really having such a tight grip on the game. And that's why at the time she felt like it was time to strike while the iron was hot. Like, they'd gotten that collective sentiment. And I think from, playing these games, I'm sure you would know this as well, Casey. When you build that momentum to try and arrange a hit on somebody, sometimes the boulder's just falling down way too fast, rolling down way too fast to put a stop to it. So when you suddenly think, wait, am I doing this too quickly? Or is it too soon? It might be too late to stop it. In Bads' case, however, I think even if they did want to try to stop the hit, it was going to happen inevitably, because he was painting himself to be such a dominant force in the game. And when you're playing in under such fluid circumstances, the biggest threat emerges inevitably, and then they just get taken out.
Well, I think also with the Bads boot, if it did not happen the way that it did happen in the game, then it probably would have been Bing going home. With the whole like idle play, if that all
Right.
played out the way that he wanted, I think actually it was the smart move to get Bads out. And given that he
If
had
you're
been,
Bing, definitely, yeah.
well, I think for a lot of people, because I even think about our season where it's like you have someone who has been dominating, someone who's doing a really good job of playing the game, and it gets to a point where if you let them get too far, it's over.
Stop, man. I'm getting traumatized here. You're triggering my PTSD from Zoomvivor 4.
But yeah, like
but
with
I
Zoom-
totally get what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think the best move once you play something like that is try and figure out how to manage the aftermath of that.
And
How
that's
do
what
you-
Bing was trying to do. She was trying to find an idol because she wanted to mitigate any circumstances that could lead to her boot, right? She technically did what she could in the moment, which was just search through all the breakout rooms, find the idol, and then try to get a sense of where everybody's heads were at. And from what she could perceive, everybody seemed to be talking about her. And from what Brian was telling her, because Brian was her number one, he was also kind of telling her the same thing. The problem, I think, with Brian was while he was forthcoming with Bing, Bing wasn't forthcoming with him, right? So because Bing didn't tell Brian, which I think was a great move, by the way, that Bing didn't tell Brian that she had the idol. But in not knowing that Bing had the idol and was 99.9% going to play it at Tribal Council, Brian thought, I still have to save Bing. Because his innate instinct of being loyal to her kicked in, and that's why he wanted to take advantage of the 3-2 split that the other 5 people were going to do against Bing, right? That's why he was like, all right, there are 3 votes going to Bing, 2 votes going to Kenita, and I'm going to throw my 1 vote at Kenita to hopefully throw everything off into disarray. So that's what he was trying to do. But I think because he kind of asserted himself in that moment, he made himself the target.
Yeah, and once again, I agree. I mean, we kind of did say that right in the beginning, but yeah, I feel bad for Brian. I just really do.
So do I, dude. So do I.
I mean, because that for people who should know at this point, this was Brian's first loss.
Right. This is a
And-
guy who's played 2 games before and has never lost. He's won both times. Am I getting my facts right?
Yeah, he's won both times. He's played 3 games, won the first 2. Now he's lost his third. And I'm very curious about, and I mean, there's no point in really going on about it too long, but like, I'm very curious about how he played his first 2 games and if this was different, if this is what, cost him. But we don't know that. And there's no point in really like, going down that rabbit hole.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great point. But I think I just want to add to the fun fact on Brian, right? Like when you play a game like Survivor and you're playing in a field of 18, kind of like they are in this season, you're basically only really giving yourself a 7 to 8% chance of winning, right? So realistically, you enter a game like this, I don't think anybody should really get their hopes up of, oh yeah, I'm gonna fucking win this shit. You have what, 7 to 8%? When we played in our season, we had 20 people there. You're giving yourself a 5% chance of winning a game. 5% is such low odds. So like, chances are when you enter a game like that, you're really not gonna win.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I have always kind of had the mindset of while watching Survivor, but you don't quite understand the reality of that actual thought. Cause like I've only played a handful of games at this point, and man, playing Zoomvivor, I was so, and that was my first game. I was so sure I was going to make it to the merge. I was just like,
Sorry, bud.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, plus after you play so many of these games, I'm sure everyone's just like, like it is what it is. But no, like I was so sure I was going to make it to the merge. And I think, in my experience, I didn't do anything wrong. Ultimately I got swap fucked and then it came down to me versus Melissa. But anyway, but yeah, that is the thing. It's just like you're going to play these games, and even in regular Survivor, there is so much luck. There's so much luck to this.
Absolutely, and Brian was the type of person who was swap fucked, right? Remember, he was pretty swap fucked in the pre-merge. Like there was a point where he was basically his ass was basically cooked, right? And then they decided to take Manu out at the last moment. So Brian shouldn't even be here at this point.
But then again, Manu shouldn't have even gone one more than he did. But I mean,
exactly.
Yeah.
Which really goes to prove the point that you just made, that a lot of these games, right? Whether you're playing the actual thing, the actual Survivor game, or playing these fan-made versions, or these orgs, or these minis, whatever you want to call them, a lot of luck goes into it.
Yeah. I mean, you still have to give people their props, when they do make it really far. Like, I mean, I don't care what anyone says, whether you like or hate Sandra, for instance. She made it to the end in her very first 2 games, and she won it. I mean, it's there's a bit of luck involved, but also she has a strategy, and you got to give it to her for even getting to that point twice, and even making it as far as she did her her third and fourth time, which I mean, I think the way she played her third and fourth time just goes to show that she's not stupid. She knows the game, and she knows how to get, manipulate people, but, don't want to, go down that rabbit hole also. But yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. I think everyone, if they get the opportunity, they should play games like these, because it really helps, clarify things a little bit more when you're even watching the show. You might even look at the show in a whole new light after playing one of these games.
Oh yeah, most definitely. You mentioned getting to the end, kind of like what Sandra did, right? And I want to talk about getting to the end here of this season, because based on those last few minutes at the end, James's voiceover basically tells us that we've got a 2-part finale coming up, and even in the confessionals in this past episode, people were already openly talking about who they wanted to take to the end, right? So for example, I remember Brian in his confessional saying that he wanted to take Kenneth and Erica to the end. And when you're in a game like this, right? You don't want to hear your name in these conversations. You don't want to hear your name in these confessionals because I don't know if this is revealing too much behind the curtain, but these confessionals are recorded post game. Okay, so I mean, obviously you can't record these things while you're actually playing the game in at whatever time it is here in the Philippines or whatever time it is in the States, right? Like I think that's just practical logistics I'm talking about here, but when you hear your name in these confessionals and somebody says my ideal final three is to take X and Y to the end, you never want to be X and Y because that means that whoever's giving the confessional is saying that they think they can beat you. You don't want that. So when Brian says I want to take Kenneth and Erica to the end, that doesn't really paint a good picture of them as endgame players. Or if it does paint them as endgame players, chances are they probably won't get as much respect as the person giving that confessional. Because when you take a look at the overall edits zooming out, Brian's edit has painted him to be a little bit more active because he's been moving in lockstep with Bing, and then before that, Lima Ota 5. As opposed to Kenneth and Erica, who have kind of been more like side characters in the overall narrative. Like, we haven't really seen much agency from Kenneth up to this point. Like, yes, he has won immunity, but the last couple of votes he hasn't voted correctly, so that doesn't really add to your resume when you get towards the end. Same way for Erica, although Erica has been voting correctly, she's really been portrayed as somebody who is figuring everything out on the fly. And when you compare someone like Erica to somebody like Bads, for example, who seemed to have so much control on the entire game from start up to the moment where he got voted off, you'd rather give your vote to someone like Bads, right? So you just don't want to be those players in those confessionals where you're identified as the ideal people to take to the end.
And I agree with that. And I actually have that written down as one of my notes too, that Brian mentioned that. But, here is what I will say. I mean, because obviously he wants them in the end because they're goats and obviously everyone can beat a goat. But, we have seen time and time and time again in Survivor history where people at this point in the game around the final 7, they jumpstart their game in a whole new way. In the actual game of Survivor, we usually see it around the loved ones visit. And we've seen numerous people win because that's when they flip their game into full gear. They start to make all the moves. They start to win immunities. They start to get the big threats out of the game. And I think this episode was the best edit. And I said it before, but I think it was the best edit for both Kenneth and Erica. Now, once again, with Kenneth, though, he didn't vote correctly, but I think with him, the fire that was lit under his ass was the fact that his closest ally, Bads, got out. So I think now he's just like, I got to do what I got to do. And I've actually heard from Kenneth's gameplay, outside of Zoomvivor, he actually is a really good, player. So I don't think we should discount him by any means. Now with Erica, I feel like, and I'm like one of the only people that thinks this, that, the majority of the game, she has been player-wise socially unaware. She might be a social butterfly, but as a player, she's not all there. But she has found herself in all the right alliances, even in the alliance, or the grouping that, did not stick with her that one time. She's still been with the right people. She's still been on the right side of the votes. She had, good insight and confessionals this game. And just the fact that she was also starting to be skeptical of Kenneth. She wasn't sure she wanted to stay or go with him because there are pros and cons to that, especially if he's looked at as a GOAT. So I think Erica is starting to kind of flip her game right now. So depending on who she sits with in the end and depending on what her next moves are, if she makes it to the end, she could potentially have a shot. Same thing with Kenneth, really same thing with anyone.
Yeah, you could say the same thing about Bing, right? You mentioned Kenneth having a fire lit under his ass because his closest ally just got taken out. Look at Bing. Her closest ally just got taken out, and then Brian, on his way out, literally and outwardly encourages Bing to go out and win it. And I've played these games with Bing enough to know that she's also the type of player who knows how to step it up in the big moments. And she's done a very good job of laying low, especially in the first half of the game. Like, she'd been on the same tribe as Bads, and when she saw that he was really having a stranglehold on the control of the game, she just let him do his thing while being aware enough to recognize that this is somebody I've got to keep my eye on, and that she waited for the time to strike, and then she took him down. Bing's also pretty competent in challenges, and we saw her win an individual immunity already. And I don't know if it was the edit or whatever, but I actually thought that she had the "I am now safe" phrase lined up first, and Kenneth just happened to be the one to call it out first. So it was kind of like Wendell and Laurel from Ghost Island.
Yep.
I'm not sure if you noticed that.
It's really funny because the person I watched it with, that was the exact point that we brought up. So,
yeah. So I'm again, I wouldn't know. I wasn't there when it all happened, right? But I'm just really basing things off of the edit that I saw. So that was kind of weird, but whatever.
But if you have the answer, you need to call James. You
exactly, yeah,
have the answer
exactly.
and then sit stupidly. But granted, we don't know that that's actually really what happened. We would have to have a little bit more insight from the player.
Right. No. You're absolutely right. And if Kenneth really was the first person to call it out, then good on him, because you have to recognize that game awareness, right? Like, I'm in an immunity challenge. I've got to call it out as soon as I can. Kind of like what Laurel did back in Ghost Island, which Wendell himself learned come Winners at War, right? To the detriment of his tribe anyway, when they lost because he was so caught up in it. But going back to Zoomvivor and this end game, you're right, Casey, when you mentioned that this is the time when people start trying to figure out what their end games look like, and everybody else mentioned it. Even Kenita said that she has a clear path to the end, but as a narrator, as a confessionalist, I feel like she has so much room for improvement. Like, she said she has a clear path to the end, but she didn't tell us what her clear path to the end was and with whom that was. And even from her portrayal in the edit, I don't exactly know what her path to the end would look like. So that left me with more questions than answers. But with that being said, right, you're thinking about your path to the end, and you have to consider the time when you're playing this, because for Dakota and for Erica, they're in the U.S., right? They're in the Midwest, so they're on, what is it, Eastern time, Central time? It's basically late afternoon around the time that this is happening. But for the Filipinos, it's fucking 3 a.m., 4 a.m. And I remember getting to this point and my brain was mush.
Yeah, I actually think it was a little bit later, and I could be wrong. I believe right around the time of the final 7, it had to have been 5 o'clock Eastern time, which meant that it was about
Jesus
6 o'clock
Christ.
in the Philippines, 6 in the morning. I could be wrong. I might be like an hour or so off, but I believe that's what it was around.
No, yeah. So that's even worse, dude, considering that these people don't have any sleep, right? And I'm only going to talk about the Filipinos' experiences, because whether or not you're acclimated to the night shift, that really takes a toll on you physically and mentally. And I remember getting to that point, final 7, final 6, and I was super hungry, I was super exhausted, and my internet connection was also fluctuating every now and then. So you have all these things that you're trying to juggle, and then you're trying to think of these permutations in your head about who you want to get to the end with. So it's way easier than it looks.
Yeah.
Or it's not as easy as it looks. There, I just had to get that right. It's not as easy as it looks.
Yeah, and with that too, I mean, with Kanita, she could have actually laid everything out, but who knows? James could have taken it out for reasons A, B, C, or D. We don't know. But I think with her game, she, as the players are that are left in the game, I think she might have one of the best social games where everyone's going to like her. They're not going to have anything against her. It's also just a matter of, can she fill the rest of the resume up, or at least enough to beat the other two? And that's the thing, each of the players have kind of their own little highlights at this point in time.
Yeah, I'm actually going to disagree with you on that one, because I think based on Kenita's gameplay and what we're shown, I think she's kind of on the same level as Erica. Where what you said about Erica was that she seemed a bit unaware socially. I think Kenita is also a little bit unaware socially based on what I'm seeing. Again, I'm going to have to preface this by saying based on what I'm seeing, right? I don't think... Well, Kenita was left out of a couple of votes for one. Like that demerge, she was left out of the vote on that one, right? That's why... was it Kenneth who had his eyes on her, or somebody? She comes across as this player who seems very amiable, but it's also easy to leave out, because you know that even if you leave her out, she'll understand and she'll come crawling back to your alliance. Do you get what I mean? Do you get that archetype?
I get what you mean. I think though, my point with her is the fact that, let's take let's say, we're at a final two and it's like her and Erica, once again, she might be a social butterfly and she might know AB, whatever. But I think people have generally liked Kenita more. And I think that's part of the social game. Everyone does like her. I mean, I think even the fans and audience probably feel similarly as players maybe do in the game, where they like her. She's easy to talk to. She's kind of bubbly and stuff like that. I don't think she's unaware necessarily all the time what's going on, but I think people recognized what happened with, they knew that with the bads vote not to include her in on it. It's not that she just like missed, what was going on. But I mean, that was just my like point of view on the whole thing.
Yeah, but I think it's because Ken also has ties to Bing and Brian. Like, I think Bing has mentioned in previous confessionals that Brian and Ken were really her type too. So even within the Maota Five, which she insulated herself, or she insulated herself with Brian and Kenita, with Bads and Kenneth being on the outs of that Maota 5, right? So it's actually nice to see this Rashomon edit of sorts where you have this sense of unreliable narrators. So this was also very much present in the edit of our season. But in this case, it's very much toned down. So you had somebody like Bads who was saying, I control the Maota 5, I know where everybody's heads are at. And then you have the opposite point of view, which is Bings, who says that Bads thinks he's controlling the Maota 5, but I've insulated myself with Brian and Ken, and they've got my best interests in mind. Whereas Bads has Kenneth, and then, I've got my eyes on him already, even though we're part of this alliance. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So you've got that playing into the edit. Yeah, I was planning to bring up Kat because we haven't talked about her at all. But if you had a point that you wanted to add, go right ahead.
Well, three things. One, I was actually going to bring up Kat and then potentially Dakota. I feel like actually we haven't talked a whole lot about them in general. And also, nice little reference. You don't really have people referencing Rashomon a lot, so I love that movie.
So I haven't seen the movie, but I love that as a storytelling technique.
Oh,
yeah.
God,
so I heard about
really
it in
short.
college. Dude, I heard about it in college in English 11, right? So it's basic college literature. And I never saw the movie. I think I read the short story it was based on. And then I'd been fascinated about it through Wikipedia ever since. So when I was watching our season get played back, I was like, James, in Tagalog, bakit ang gulo? Why is it so confusing? Why is it so messy? And he's like, because it's anarchy. And I'm like, when he said because it's anarchy, I was like, are you editing this with Rashomon in mind? And it turns out that he was. So
Really?
Apparently. That's what James said. I felt smart when we bonded over fucking Rashomon for like a good 5 minutes. So I'm gonna keep that with me. I'm gonna take that to the grave.
Yeah, if you get the chance, watch it. I think it's just a little over an hour long. But anyway, back to the game though. Yeah, so I was actually going to bring up, talking a little bit more about Kat and Dakota, who I don't feel like we've talked about a lot. I also have a point that I really need to make before we get into the final thoughts in the Zoomies about Bads. But anyway, let's talk about Kat for a second. So I seem like you almost actually had a point to make.
Yeah, with Kat, we were kind of teased that she was going to be on a warpath against all the remaining players when Charlene got taken out. And that double boot with Costas and Charlene is by far the best episode of the season for me. Yeah, it was so well told, right? Like,
I think it's one of the best of the series.
Right. So Charlene thinks that she's safe, passes off the idol to Kat. Kat plays it for herself, saves herself, and then Charlene gets blindsided, and has egg on her face, right? And it's weird because the Charlene boot was kind of karmic in the self-contained episode, whereas Bads' boot was karmic in the context of the entire season. You know what I mean? Like Charlene was kind of like a microcosm of what happened to Bads. But where this leaves Kat is still very interesting to me because we were teased with her revenge tour and it hasn't happened. Like, she's kind of low key in this episode.
See, I gotta admit something. I am, and I know I'm not the only one. I'm not really a fan of previews in general. I'm not a fan of previews. I'm not a fan of trailers. It's usually bullshit when you see it, and then also some people overstep it and they just ruin everything for you. Granted, I don't think in the previews things have been spoiled, but I'm just not a fan. I think that little tidbit that we got was Kat winning immunity and Kat saving herself when she probably needed to save herself the most. I think that was just the point ultimately, and
No,
I
I'm
don't
with
think
you.
there's a whole lot more to look into it on it. So, but yeah,
Hey, I'm with you, brother, because I do believe in Hibicki's law. And if you remember Hibicki's law from David versus Goliath, is the more a castaway is featured, and portrayed as if their head is on the chopping block, the more likely it is that they're safe. If you're not featured, then you're fucked. So that's
hopefully.
something we saw a lot of in David versus Goliath. But where this leaves Kat, it's really up in the air for me. I do think though that Kat, if she makes it to the end, has a very compelling story to tell, especially since not a lot of people probably realize that she's been an underdog for virtually the entire post-merge game. Like, she comes in with original Arakoa being down at the numbers and not really knowing who to trust. And then she gets by because of a lucky break, getting that idol from Charlene, right? And having the awareness to know that the votes were gonna land on her, and then leveraging her relationship with Charlene, which goes to something Dakota said at Tribal Council, where he said that this season is very much based on personal connections. And I believe there's a link between Charlene and Kat based on Stranded, this other org that they played together earlier this year or sometime last year or whenever it was, right? So that very much plays a part into where Kat is at. But right now, I'm not sure where her personal connections are at with the remaining players in the game. I'm not sure how close she is with Kenneth, with Bing, with Dakota, and with Erica. I mean, people like Dakota and Erica tried to take her out, right? In that demerged tribal council. So, is she gonna remain open to working with them? I don't know. It's also very interesting to see where Kat is at as a player, because her profile is, I believe she's the oldest player remaining in the game.
Yes.
Right? She's the oldest player remaining in the game. I believe she's 36, and people have a certain reverence for her. Like, they call her Ate Kat. Ate in Tagalog means big sister. So there's this idea that the ate, kind of like the mom type in Survivor, is expected to be more motherly, more caring, and all that. But then when you when you juxtapose that with her being vindictive and being like, uubusin ko kayong lahat, I'm gonna take out everybody who took out Charlene, right? There's that there's that crap, what is that word I'm looking for? Like, something just doesn't jive, right? So I'm really interested to seeing where her arc unfolds as we get to the end game.
Yeah, and I think another thing too is, you might have one clear target on the chopping block, every other episode, but I think we definitely are at the point where, things are shifting big time, and the only target in the eyes of the people in the game right now seem to be Bing.
I think she's
So,
fucked. I think she's fucked. And I'm going to say this with all the love in the world for my friend, but I'm also going to say this with all the realism and all the pragmatism, whatever the word is, of somebody who thinks about games and numbers way too much. I think she's fucked, because if you've seen how this game has gone, the biggest threat is not likely to have a march to the end the way that Rain did. And I don't think anybody at this point is as insulated within social connections and advantages as Matt was in season 3. So their winning games are very different, and I think whoever wins Zoomvivor 5 will also be forging a different path to the end vis-a-vis Matt and Rain. With the game that Bing has played, I think she deserves a lot of respect, but I also think that she has too much heat on her. Plus, with her playing the idol, now people are even more aware of her game smarts, and I don't think that she's sitting at the end.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, definitely the idle play probably will scare a ton of people. It's really hard to say, how things are going to unfold, because, when I was on production watching all of this, I definitely had my favorites. And then there was a number of people who I saw nothing from, but seeing them in these episodes, I have had a whole new light and perspective on a number of players.
I think the confessionals really help, man. Like, they're supposedly your
Well,
window into the soul or into their heart or into what they're thinking, right?
well,
And like,
unless they
speaking
try
of,
to change their narrative.
right, which I have a huge problem with when you record these things post game. But again, I recognize that logistically it's just impossible to do everything in real time. What I will say though is that watching the confessionals and watching them unfold, the one person who suddenly stood out in this episode was Kenneth. because he suddenly had a burst in sassiness or whatever. Like, he started getting extra sassy towards the other players. His voting confessional with Bing was, like, Bing, bitch, which I kind of felt was a bit uncalled for because I don't have any context. Like, did Bing wrong him or whatever? But then again,
He's just mad about the bads thing, I think.
probably, right? And he also had that one confessional in the pre-merge where he took a shot at Rain for no reason, which I thought was hilarious.
So did I. I loved it.
Right, that was hilarious. So, I'm saying all this to point out that we haven't really seen much of Kenneth's personality aside from those little bursts earlier in the season. But here in this episode, we're seeing a lot of personality from Kenneth, and that leads me to wonder, where has this been all season? Like, I wish we got more of this side of Kenneth earlier on, because up to this point, he just seemed like a side character. And I'm not saying this to take a shit on him at all. It's just really the way it was with the edit. Like, you can tell from watching a season who your main characters and your side characters are. And watching all the episodes up to this point, the main characters were Bads, Dakota, Bing, Charlene to an extent, and Costas. So those are your 5 main characters that the story seemed to revolve around. Maybe Brian.
I would even throw, despite us maybe not thinking she's played the best game or a top tier game, Erica's actually had quite a few confessionals throughout the season.
Yeah, but you have to consider what type of confessional she's been having.
Well,
Does
yeah,
she
that's
talk about
why
herself,
I said,
or does she talk about other people? Because that also plays a role in what type of edit they're getting. So I'm gonna give an example from our season, right? Erica's friend Garrett, who was on our season, a lot of his early confessionals were actually told from the second person point of view, where he was talking about people like Rain, people like me, people like Gage, and what he felt about them, but not necessarily where his head was at and what he was thinking. So when you're looking at that from the context of a narrative and a story you're trying to tell, this is not your primary storyteller, because this is a side character pointing out or adding layers to the main character's arcs. And again, I'm not saying this to take a shit on anybody. It's really just the way it is with narratives and edits.
Yeah, I completely get that. I do. And I think that's actually a really good way of looking at it, and that's good insight. I was actually just looking at the time, so I kind of want to speed this along a little bit because I know you got stuff. So I do want to say, I just want to very briefly touch on Dakota. So I do think that, Bing right now is the most outward threat in the game, but I think Dakota, like I said, I give him props ultimately. In
playing
managing,
a great game.
Yeah, in managing his threat level. I gotta be honest though, let me preface this by saying I've met Dakota not in real life, but I met him over, chat a couple times. Really nice guy. You can tell that he's passionate. He's a sensitive guy. He seems smart, really, really nice. In the context of the game, in his confessionals, I don't understand how someone can like him in the game. I think he comes off extremely cocky and very entitled.
Right, and I think that it speaks to how these games, especially when they're presented with a narrative, like in the form of an episode, really play to people's performative instincts. And I think a lot of the reason why a lot of people from this community like to play these games is because they like performing as a character. They like portraying this different side of themselves that they can't be in real life. So, for example, for me, I love playing the villain. And that's why when I was active in pro wrestling, before the whole world went to shit because of COVID, I played a bad guy in the ring. And I loved it. There was something exhilarating about eliciting all those boos, getting kids to cry, getting people to want to beat me up after the show. Something is exhilarating about that. It thrills me, okay? And when you enter games like this and you know that they're going to be broadcast for people, there's a part of me that actually enjoys playing up a character and trying to push people's buttons. And I didn't really get to do that in our season. But I think for people like Dakota, people like Kenneth, people like Kat, when they're bringing out their feisty sides, I think that's cathartic for them. So I wouldn't judge them as people, or even judge them and say I don't think I would like them in a game because they come across as entitled and cocky or whatever. I think that even somebody like Bads, a lot of these guys and girls are really just doing it for show because it's fun. and I'm never going to be the one to take that fun away from them.
I mean, yeah, I get that, and I agree with you. I think I've tried to say the same thing about a number of people during our season. They were playing a character, and yeah, sometimes it is the fun. It's the same thing with like Halloween when people are pretending
Sure.
to be something they're not. And that's why I also wanted to preface it by saying, like, from every meeting that I've had with Dakota outside of the game, he is a nice guy. He's very passionate. He's sensitive. He's a smart guy. But I'm just saying, for the context of the game, for people who don't even know who he is, I just don't see how they could like him based off his confessionals. I also want to move on to another point, because then we really should go on to the Zumi Awards. I have to air a little bit of a grievance, and I think Survivor as well as Zoomvivor and all other orgs need to freaking correct this, because this is something I'm so sick of seeing. When you are at tribal council, jury members should not be able to interfere. They should not be able to confirm questions or anything like that. We saw that with Wendell and Winners at War, as well as other people. We saw that this episode with Bads literally writing on a motherfucking whiteboard to confirm something. That is interference in the game. They were voted out. Their part comes in at the end. I'm so sick of it. I don't want to see it again.
You know what? I actually didn't notice it until you pointed it out. So I'm not sure who he was trying to help, but if you're with the information you're giving me just now of jurors trying to signal something to the players who are still active, I think that's wrong as well, 100%. I am also not a fan of jury members trying to give the remaining players a leg up over their other competitors, right? That's just not fair. And you can come at me with the counter argument that Survivor is inherently an unfair game, but there are also rules that you have to adhere to, and one of them is that once you're voted out and you're a member of the jury, that's it. You're done. You don't get to say shit until the final tribal council.
Yes. And just to clarify, or let anyone know for who didn't see it, I guess like you, Stan, they were talking about the All Filipino Alliance, and Bads wrote on his board that it was a lie, as in people were denying the Filipino Alliance, and Bads was like, that's a lie, like there was a Filipino Alliance. Which ultimately, I don't blame on James. I was on production myself, or any of the other people, because no one knew that Bads was going to do that. I just think people need to crack down on that. And like I said, in other orgs and in Survivor, that cannot happen. That isn't.
So what do you do? Do you take the juror out?
There needs to be some sort of penalty to stop them from that. Or I don't know if there is actually a clear rule, if I'm being completely honest, about the jury, but it needs to be expressed that they cannot do shit like that.
Yeah, for sure. I'm with you there. I just am not in a position where I can impose a penalty, let alone suggest it. But if we're talking about this in a vacuum, I'm totally with you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the solution is to the problem, but it just needs to be clear that they can't do that, and there could be a penalty for that. Anyway, moving on to the Zumi Award. For those who don't know, the Zumi Award is, the award we award those who played the best game, or for some people's criteria, the most entertaining. It just depends on the person. I like to award it to the person who played the best game in the episode, made the smartest moves, whatever. Stan, do you have someone in mind?
Yeah. So when I was watching everything play out, I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna give Bing the award out of loyalty and out of friendship and all that fuzzy good stuff, right? But then after watching everything else play out, I have to be fair and objective and give it to Dakota, because I think that Dakota has also been he's taken over the Bad's position without being as domineering, and I think that takes a lot of skill. It takes a lot of skill to not be as much of a control freak as Bads was portrayed to be. Now, I'm not accusing Bads of being a control freak in the game or in real life. I'm just, again, basing it all off on the edit. But Dakota has done a really good job of getting things to go his way, like getting the 50-50 coin and then flipping the script and jumping on Bing and Brian's idea of taking Bads out. And now here, he recognizes that Brian was, for whatever reason, whatever his motive was, trying to shift the direction of the split vote to get Kenita out instead of their intended target, that being Bing. Now, Dakota didn't know that Bing had an idol and that she was fully intending to play it, but the fact that he pivoted quickly and seemed to be the one to organize this group, because from the group of four who voted Brian out, I think only Dakota was really capable of organizing everything quickly. Again, based on the edit. So I'm gonna have to give it to Dakota. I'm also gonna say that Dakota is my winner pick. I called my shot with the bingo cards on the Zoomvivor page when the season began, and I knew I wanted Dakota in my top five, and I didn't know where to put him, so I put everyone first in their respective spots. And I put Bing in fifth just to make fun of her and be like, I put you to the top five because you're my friend, but you're the lowest among them because I wanna, I wanna make fun of you. And then Dakota was there, and I was like, well, fuck. All I have left is the winner's position. So I put Dakota as a winner pick for lack of a better choice. And now it seems like I'm being proven right. So thank you, Dakota, because I think I might win the sweet prize because of you.
All right. Well, I think for the most part, you said everything that I was going to say. My initial thoughts going into this episode, and even as I was watching the episode, was going to be to give it to Bing in the end. I think I would have been a lot more inclined to give Bing the award if the votes truly were on Bing and she saved herself with an idol. Awesome
Definitely.
that she still got that idol, which is kind of still funny, that people really aren't trying more to look for the idols, which, I mean, that's a whole other point. But yeah, Bing was going to be my person, but, really thinking about it, despite us not even actually talking about Dakota a whole lot this episode, he did what he needed to do. There was a very clear confessional right at the beginning of the episode where he talked that Brian needed to be the target. It's really the only indication that Brian, the whole episode, was going to be the target. So I think that was the indication from the edit to the audience that was Dakota plan. So I agree. I'm giving Dakota the Zoomy. So on that note, do you have any final thoughts, Dan?
Yeah, I think this game is Dakota's to lose at this point. I mentioned that it's going to be incredibly difficult for Bing to make it to the end just because of how big of a threat she's become. I think that for somebody like Dakota, it's going to be challenging to try to fend off all these other players because if you're going to draw a reference from Edge of Extinction, the sharks and the minnows, right? It's really two sharks and everybody else being a minnow. And again, that's based on how they've been portrayed all season long. And I would be devastated if both Bing and Dakota don't make it because I want one of them to make it to the end and have a strong case to argue in front of the jury. That being said, if none of them make it to the end, then that final tribal council better be interesting as fuck because I want to see how somebody like Erica defends her game, somebody like Ken defends her game, somebody like Kat defends her game, Kenneth, right, defends her game. So I don't know. It's gonna be super super interesting.
Yeah, I think everyone should like the way that this game plays out. I think it's very entertaining, and once again, I think this is the best season, definitely by far. So, on that note, thank you guys for tuning in. If you could like, comment, and subscribe, and please, if you get a moment to even share it as well, it'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you again for Stan for joining us today. And I guess on that note, everyone have a good day.